Hello everyone, and welcome to Retro Brick Reviews, where today we'll be taking a look at LEGO Star Wars Set 75300, Imperial TIE Fighter. This set includes 432 pieces, 3 minifigures, and retails for about $45 in the United States. It released on January 1st, 2021, and has no signs of retiring. And without further ado, let's begin, starting with the minifigures. Our first figure is an Imperial TIE pilot, and while not a unique figure, it's still a very nice one to get and obviously necessary for what this set is. Both the helmet and torso prints have appeared several times in the past, and the same goes for the Death Star Trooper legs. However, I would like to give special note to the fact that this is the helmet variant with the 2 silver streaks, denoting this as being one of Vader's wingmen from the Battle of Yavin, which is a nice touch, even if that particular variant is fairly common. It's still cooler than the standard figure. But the torso is as it's always been, with the printed tubes and the apparatus. We still do not have an original trilogy helmet with the 3D tubes, like are featured on the sequel trilogy TIE pilots. That would be nice to get sometime in the future, especially since this piece already does need something of an update, because if we turn it around to the back, you can see the head showing through. That's because this helmet was originally designed to be used with a black minifigure head underneath, but now that LEGO just uses generic faces, you have all that color showing through that is just very unsightly. You can also see the back print, which is very simple, considering the fact that at the time of the set's release it was about a decade old, but it still does its job. And if we remove the helmet, you can see that underneath, it's just a very common generic head, first appearing on Bruce Wayne from the 2012 DC Comics line, though I think a lot of people know it more as the Loki or Lex Luthor head. Still better than Angry Clone, though, and his accessory is just a simple blaster pistol. Nothing unique, but a nice piece to get. Overall, nice figure, just nothing really special if you collect LEGO Star Wars. Much of the same goes for our next figure, a standard Imperial Stormtrooper. Now, this does use the 2019 and onward style of helmet, where it is double molded with both the white and black colors of plastic, but because of the new shaping, the chin goes over the torso and this trooper is unable to turn his head, and I've never really liked this design and probably never will. The helmet just seems a bit too big, and the chin going over the torso is just really wrong in terms of shaping, and I don't get why they had to update it over the old style. In my opinion, it just wasn't really necessary at all, and it doesn't add very much. Around back, you can see that probably the best addition for this helmet is that you now have those 2 black squares around the back that previously were not on the older style of helmet. However, considering that on this figure, and on several others using this helmet, LEGO has printed dark bluish gray on those black spots, in retrospect, I don't see why they couldn't have just kept the old helmet and printed the printed the squares onto the back of that piece, but oh well. Also, I think this does look fairly bland, with the dark bluish gray used for the highlight colorings on the front, whereas previously they used sand blue, but enough complaining about the helmet. The rest of this figure is pretty good. It's the torso and leg styling we've been seeing since 2014, although as of making this video, this design is now obsolete as LEGO switched to a new style in 2022. But in my opinion, this works perfectly fine. There's no issues with it. The black hip piece that LEGO's been using since the beginning of LEGO Star Wars is there, and unfortunately this might end up being one of the last sets on shelves to keep with that, because again, starting in 2022, there's a new design that now has a white hip piece, in keeping with the current style of clone troopers, but not in keeping with the history of this LEGO license. Around back, you can see just more of the details you'd expect, with the little grenade canister at the back. And underneath, the head is another just very common generic one within Star Wars, but this is one I much prefer getting to the Bruce Wayne head, because this just... It's a lot more usable, even outside of Star Wars. It's just some guy. There aren't really any pronounced facial features outside of the little crease between the eyebrows, and yeah, I've always liked this face, and I'm glad to have another one. Oh, and his accessory is just a standard blaster. Overall, another good figure to have. I am still not the biggest fan of this new helmet, but considering that LEGO seems to have no plans of switching back to the previous style anytime soon, like they did with the awful 2018 X-Wing pilot helmets, I suppose it is nice to just have another one to add to the army. And obviously, if you don't have a lot of this figure, it's cool to get a Stormtrooper. That said, the truly exciting part of this set's figure selection is this guy. The box bills him as NIL8, or Annihilate, but this is just a fairly standard RA7 Imperial Protocol droid. And it is really cool to get this guy in such a cheap set, because previously, for the accurate style with the specially molded head, in the black coloring, this guy was only available in the 2016 Death Star. And this is an updated version with more detail, and it comes in a fairly inexpensive and very available set. So that's really nice. The head is exactly the same as it was in that set and prior in the 2014 New Yoda Chronicles set. It's just in black with no printing whatsoever, but I think that works perfectly fine, and the mold looks very nice. Lots of detail in there. It's kind of hard to see because it's all in black, but a lot of good design. The torso is pretty good. I like all the wiring there around the middle. Very vibrant, has a very good amount of contrast in comparison to the rest of the figure, and the legs are just serviceable, but they do complete the design. Back print is also very nice, and I like how all the lining on the torso really does differentiate this guy from what you would see on a 3PO protocol droid. It really does make this guy stand out as he does in the movies. That said, there isn't a whole lot to say on this figure. It's very cool to get, with how uncommon it's been in the theme and how fairly recognizable it is from the original movies. So, yeah, love getting this guy. Cool exclusive to have in this set, since as of me making this video, this figure has yet to reappear. Yeah, but that's really all I have to say about the minifigure selection in the set, so now let's move on to the build itself. So here is the most recent LEGO Imperial TIE Fighter. And before we go any further, I think the thing that immediately needs to be discussed is the size and scale of this model. For starters, here it is next to a standard LEGO minifigure, so you can see its relative size in comparison. And there are two ways to approach the size argument. On one hand, we have the thing that that every LEGO Star Wars fan has already talked about in the 2 years since this set's release, that being that it is definitely scaled down in comparison to how it appears in universe and how it has appeared in past LEGO Star Wars sets. And that is true. This is a bit of a smaller model. However, I don't really mind, because if we look at it from the other end, in my opinion, this is a very nicely sized model for a $45 set. In fact, at its original retail price of $40, I thought this was an amazing deal for how large this model is in comparison. And since LEGO Star Wars playscale has always been a very woolly subject, very inconsistent, I don't mind them scaling this model down a bit, since it is still a very good size, and the main difference between this model and previous ones is just the fact that it's a heck of a lot cheaper. I know that a lot of people complain about this model being proportionally inaccurate because of the scale down, but The only thing I really see on that front is that the cockpit windscreen is definitely a bit large in comparison to the rest of the sort of ball cockpit that ties have. But I'm fine with that. I think that's an acceptable trade-off for how good the rest of this model looks at being such a lower price compared to previous ties. And really, it's not that bad. Like, honestly, there's a good chance you didn't even notice that it's somewhat oversized until I brought it up just now. But enough about size, and now to take a closer look at the model, we'll start with that canopy, which is the standard 6x6 tie canopy printed piece that was introduced first in 2015. And you can see that the printing on there, I believe, is meant to be light bluish gray, but it's very discolored and always has been. Not that it's really inaccurate to the films, just definitely something of note. And below that, you can see that you have the two spring-loaded shooters in the trans bright green color, and that is a matter of some debate amongst LEGO Star Wars fans, because if you don't know much about the design of ties in the movies, they have red-tipped laser cannons, but they shoot green bolts. And on all prior LEGO ties that have used spring-loaded shooters, they've always gone with the red bolts, so they have the red tips on the cannons, which makes for accurate display but inaccurate play because the lasers are the wrong color when you shoot them. Here they've done the reverse, and in my opinion, it could go either way. It just depends on how you want to use this model. If you want to display it, the red bolts are better. If you want to play with it, the green bolts are better. But until LEGO develops a double-molded, spring-loaded shooter bolt that can have a red tip and a green body, there's no real point in arguing. I mean, maybe you could say that they should just include both colors, depending on how you want to use it, but I don't really mind. I think the green bolts look fine enough. If you want to replace them with red, you probably already own a pair, and in any case, the main point of these is you can just push down at the back and fire out. And later on, we'll take a look at exactly how you fire those. But then as for probably the main play feature aside from that, you can just fold down the canopy. Up top, you have this printed dish on a trapdoor piece, and that can just fold up as well. And inside, you have a good amount of room to place in your TIE pilot. Now you can see that there are no studs in there, it's all tiled off, so he just fits in rather loosely. But you can kind of lock him in using these two bits at the side, where you have these two pieces on hinges with just a red stud, and those are really great because they very accurately represent the control panels on a TIE fighter. Whereas previously, LEGO would just use a fairly generic control panel printed element on a tile or cheese slope. Having these two small red screens is actually a lot closer to how they appear in universe, and I quite like that. While there's no official clip for it, you could also just throw his blaster in behind him. But closing the tie up, it looks good. You can see the pilot inside, and yeah, I think this works really well. Turning the model around to the back, you can just see the twin ion engines at the back, as well as the two spring shooter bolts poking out. Yeah, that's basically all there is to say on the main fuselage. I suppose one thing of note is that the box and instruction manual actually show the printed piece on top backward, so the 4 black lines are pointing toward the front and not the rear as they're supposed to. I have it with the canonically correct orientation, but I suppose if I wanted to be really stringent, technically if I was reviewing the set as it's supposed to be, it would look like this. But I don't know why that is on the box and manual, because that's a mistake that LEGO has never made before to my knowledge, but nonetheless, I figured it is of note. Going around to the wings, for starters, how they are attached is a new style. Previously, on standard TIE fighters, LEGO used a fairly complicated and moderately annoying technique of having lots of little clips and bars built into the ends of the wings and the sort of connecting bars so that it would connect in very securely, but even then it was sort of flimsy. Here, LEGO's come up with a much better solution, in my opinion, where they just use a few Technic pins attached into this brand new 6x6 piece with 5 pinholes at the bottom, which has not appeared in too many other sets since then, and it was very much designed for this. And now that I'm on camera, it's a bit difficult to get it back in there, but trust me when I say that it's not usually very difficult. There we go. But also I like this because while it is very secure, it is also very easy to intentionally detach them if you want to be playing with this against a different ship, a rebel ship, and oh, the TIE fighter got shot down, pop off a wing. I think it's very good for play in that respect, even if I don't know how intentional that was on the part of the designer. From the side of the wings, I think they look pretty nice. You have the 6-prong design, as well as the nice hexagonal outline. The center has some good detail to it. I love the printed piece, which is not new. It's appeared in quite a few sets over the years, but it's still nice. And I suppose the only other inaccuracy with this that I could mention aside from the bolts is that you can see that on the wings, toward the middle but on the lower half, you have a 1x2 ball joint piece in dark bluish gray. That is wrong. That should be in light bluish gray. There is no discoloration on the TIE wing borders in the movies. That's just because that piece is color locked to dark bluish gray and LEGO didn't want to recolor it for the sake of this set. Which is very annoying, especially since it would just be recoloring it into another color of gray. And the light bluish gray acceptor piece above that comes in both light bluish gray and dark bluish gray, but oh well. It's very annoying, again, but it's not the worst thing in the world, which I don't like having to say that, but I suppose it is true, and there really was no other way to get that connection, so the designer's hands were kind of tied with this one. Again, I wish it could have been better, but the fact that it couldn't have been better was outside of the hands of the designers, unless they wanted to completely reapproach the design of this set. So I can understand why it was done like this, even if I'm not super happy with it. But overall, I think that this is a pretty good LEGO Star Wars set for the price. It's certainly not perfect. Those gray pieces are not great, and the cockpit windscreen is a little oversized, but aside from that, this is a fairly accurate model, indeed much more accurate than a lot of other LEGO Star Wars sets that you'll find for similar prices, or even for much higher prices. You get 3 very nice minifigures. Some other great printed pieces are used around the model. In fact, there are no stickers in this set. Everything you see is a print. And for the price of $45, I think this makes a lot of sense in my mind. I definitely think that is a fair price for this. Again, I think that the original price of $40 was actually a very good deal. $45 is more what I would expect at a fair-priced LEGO set. But I could easily have seen this being $50, and I wouldn't have really batted an eye, so I'm fine with $45, and it's still $25 cheaper than the previous LEGO Imperial TIE Fighter, not to mention cheap enough that even if you're a fairly casual fan of Star Wars, you could still probably scoop up at least a few of these to have a bit of an Imperial armada going on. But that's really all I have to say on this set. It's not amazing, but it's certainly very nice. I think it is good to have a TIE Fighter on shelves, and I hope LEGO keeps this one available for a good while, as there isn't much I would change, and I think it is a good set at a good price. So thank you all so much for watching this video. If you liked it, please check out the video I have in the card on screen for my LEGO Ideas Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory submission. It is currently approaching 2,600 supporters, and if you were to watch that video and support the project, I would very much appreciate it. But for right now, this is Retro Brick Reviews, signing off.